Okay, we're still in the middle of the 15 chapters of the secrets of the Shir Hamalis, and we're up to chapter 124. A lot of these chapters are somewhat shorter chapters, so we'll go through them fairly quickly, but they're very powerful. This chapter, 124, has 8 verses, and in this chapter, King David is mostly giving thanks to God for helping the Jewish people survive throughout the exile, despite our enemies' many attempts to destroy us. And as we know, in every generation, nations all over the world rise up to try and destroy the Jewish people, but none of them prevail. And as the imagery is pretty strong in this mashal, in this Tehillim, that they're compared to deep rushing waters that are trying to drown us, swift currents trying to sweep us away. It's going to be mentioned in the fourth verse and others. But even though that happens, we are always strengthened and supported by our intense love for God. And we brave all the hazards confidently with the knowledge that our help is through and comes from God, the makers of heaven and earth. It's actually interesting because in my sermon this past Shabbos, for anyone who was there or read it, because I think sent it to some people here, it really talked about this idea that the forces of the world, whether it's the technology or assimilation or back in the times of the Enlightenment, the forces of the world really are compared to this rushing water that's trying to drown us out and bowl us over. But we have the strength of God that counters that. And what I said in the sermon was, you can't just build a wall. If you're trying to build a wall to keep out, we will not accept technology or the dangers of assimilation. We will not accept the Enlightenment movement. If you're just building a wall to try and keep everything out, then even if your wall holds strong after it's battered again and again and again, usually the forces that you're trying to repel will find a way to go over, go under, go through. It will find the cracks over time. And the only way to really counter that is to build a counter force to oppose the rushing waters. And really that's what it says in this chapter as well. There's also some verses from the Nevi'im that support this that we're going to see. But it's this idea of that the way we survive the nations of the world's attempts to wash us away, that force of rushing water, the waves that keep washing over us, is not by building a wall, but by finding something else that we can develop a passion for, that we can create a counter force for, and that's going to be love of Hashem, Ahavas Hashem, which is what we spoke about in the drasha. So let's see it in the Psukim inside. Pasuk Aleph, Shir Hamalis, a song of ascent to David, from King David. Lule Hashem, if not for God, Shehaya Lanu, who was for us, Yoimana Yisrael. That's what the Jewish people declare. Meaning they don't really speak out the full sentence, but if not for God, what would we be? What would we be able to accomplish? Where would we be? We wouldn't be around. We would have been totally destroyed, obviously. And that's the miracle of the Jewish people throughout all of history. In thousands of years, we've been oppressed, we've been persecuted, we've been murdered and killed and decimated, and yet we're still here. If that wasn't for the fact that God was on our side, obviously we would not be anywhere. So it's the very, very beginning of the chapter. Without God's intervention, we would have been doomed long, long ago and time again. Now, the second verse starts with a repetition of this phrase from the first verse. Lule Hashem shehaya lanu. So that's an exact quote from the first verse, right? Lule Hashem shehaya lanu. If not for God who was with us, b'kum aleinu adam. When a man rises up against us. Again, if not for God, then when man rises up against us, we would be destroyed. And really in the third, fourth, fifth verse, we're going to finish the sentence. So the first and the second verses are the beginning of a sentence. If not for God, we say. If not for God, when people are rising up against us, then what? So verses 3, 4, 5 are going to say what would have happened to us. But again, right now we're just saying, if not for God, then the implication is that we would have been destroyed. The reason why this phrase is repeated in verse 1 and verse 2, if not for God, what would have been, if not for God who's on our side, is because there's really 2 battles that we face, 2 existential threats that are always opposing the Jewish people throughout history, and that is the physical challenge and the spiritual challenge. They try and destroy us physically, they try and kill us, and they also try and destroy us spiritually by assimilating us, by showing us friendship that eventually turns into us losing our Judaism. And we say, if not for God who was with us, supporting us both against the physical dangers and giving us strength against the spiritual dangers, we know we wouldn't be anywhere. The Gemara also explains that this pasuk specifically refers to the Persian Empire, and that's why it says "B'kum aleinu Adam," which is an interesting expression because Adam means a man, a singular man. When did a singular man rise up against us? But in the times of Haman in the Persian Empire, that's really what happened. Haman was an individual who rose up against us, and he was specifically called an Adam, a man, which implies a common folk, as opposed to a king. That was actually a big kindness from Hashem, that when we did face that potential decimation in the times of Haman, it was really Haman who was leading the charge, not Achashverosh. Achashverosh was wicked, and he wanted the destruction of the Jewish people, but he wasn't the one leading the mission. If he would have been, it would have been a lot harder, at least on the face value, to save the Jewish people from there, because there was no escape from Achashverosh. He controlled Medina, 127 countries, the entire world, Mehodu ve'ad Kush. There was no escape. Whereas Haman, although he had immense power, he was a man, just a regular man with limited power, and eventually Achashverosh did away with him, obviously because Hashem orchestrated it that way. So if not for God, what would have happened? When this man, Haman, rose up against us, if not for God, where would we be? So now the next three verses say, I'll tell you where we would be. Azai, then, if God would not have been with us, Chaim Bila'unu, they would have swallowed us alive. Bacharos Apam Banu, with their burning rage against us. And now let's just read the next verse, verse 4. Azai, then you know what would have happened? Hamayim Shitafunu, the waters would have swept us away. Nachla Avar al Nafshenu, a torrent of river would have passed and swept over our souls. And verse 5, Azai, and then you know what would have happened? Avar al Nafshenu Hamayim Hazidonim, the seething, the wicked waters, treacherous waters would have swept over our souls. So again, very graphic descriptions and imagery of what would have happened throughout history, time and time again, with Haman and with every other wicked person who's rose up against the Jewish people. What would have happened if God had not been with us, if God had not been with us spiritually and physically? We would have been swallowed alive, swept away by the waters, swept away by the treachery. There would have been nothing left. Just some specific details in those verses. Verse 3, the idea of being eaten alive doesn't necessarily mean eaten alive. It could also mean eaten raw. But the idea being like when you eat raw food, you're rushing to eat it before it's fully cooked. The enemies of the Jewish people are so eager to seize any opportunity to harm the Jewish people that they would rush to destroy us without even pausing to make the appropriate preparations to make their plans more solid. Also, verse 4, this reminds us of this is what I was referencing in the beginning of the Shir. There's a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs, which states that Mayim Rabim Le'yachu Lechavot et Ha'ava Sheli, that the many waters cannot extinguish, they can't sweep away the love we have for God. And I think that verse is very telling, because like I was saying in the Drasha on Shabbos, and also with this chapter is really saying that the rushing waters of Shir Hashirim that can't extinguish the love, it's the rushing waters of this verse. I mean, the enemies of the Jewish people are compared to this torrent of water that's trying to wash us away. And if not for God, it would have, but Hashem stopped them. But in Shir Hashirim it says, but what's the merit? What really gives us the ability to be saved by God and not let these waters wash us away? They can't extinguish et ha'ahava, the love, because that's really what stops the waters of the world, the waters of assimilation, the waters of any anti-Semitism washing us away. It's the love that the Jewish people have for Hashem. Because, again, that's the counterforce. It's not just a wall that says, oh, we're not going to let this happen, because that can only last so long. But the love washes it back the other way and creates this counterforce, and that's how we're saved. In verse 5, I'll point out that 3 verses in a row, 3, 4, and 5, all start with the word Azai, very repetitive. Azai means then, but the Arizal notes that the numerical equivalent of the word Azai is 18. Yud is 10, Zayin is 7, Aleph is 1. 18. 3 times 18, 54. Very significant because in the Shemona Esrei, the main tefillah that we daven 3 times a day, there are 18 brachos. There's really 19 because we added one later on in history, but in the beginning there were only 18. And we still call it the Shemona Esrei, the 18 brachos. So we daven Shachos, Mincha, and Mariv, 3 times 18 is 54. And that's Azai, 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 18, 18, 18. And the message being, says the Arizal, that what gives us the ability to merit God saving us from the rushing waters, the treachery, the being eaten alive, and we can say, if not for God, we would not have been able to be saved. But you know why God saved us? Because of our prayers. That was our merit that enabled God to be able to save us. And Azai, 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 18, 18, 18, all the prayers. By the way, Haman, who is mentioned in Pasuk Beis, the Eretz Chaim points out, you know how many times the name Haman is mentioned in the book of Esther? 54. And that's also very significant. That when a man rises up to destroy us 54 times, Haman, you know what gives us again the merit to survive his onslaught and his treacherous plans? Azai, Azai, Azai. Davening Shemona Esrei, davening to Hashem 3 times a day, Shachas Mincha Maariv, 54 brachos. That's what gives us the ability to be saved from Haman, who is mentioned 54 times. Pasuk 6. Baruch Hashem, Shelo Nisananu Teref Lishnehem. It's funny, Baruch Hashem is a very common expression. Here we have Pasuk. Baruch Hashem, blessed is Hashem, Shelo Nisananu Teref Lishnehem. He did not let us be ripped apart by their teeth. Often the Jewish people are on the very brink of destruction. They're caught literally in the teeth of their oppressors, but God, in His boundless mercy, rescues them even from that moment where they're about to be ripped apart. God does not allow us to be destroyed. And then in Pasuk Zayin, verse 7, Nafshenu kitzipor nimlata, our mipach yokshim. Our souls are like birds that have escaped from a trap of birds, a bird trap. Hapach nishbar, and the trap breaks. V'anachnu nimlotnu, and we have escaped. So that second phrase is also significant because it could mean it's not just that Hashem saves us from the traps. We're in the trap already, and the trap is broken, and we're able to escape. And that could be that additional meaning. Even sometimes God spares us from tragedy. Sometimes it looks like it's already a foregone conclusion. We're already captured, and then God will break us free. Also, another idea here is that birds, the Jewish people are represented by birds because birds are very delicate, they're easily injured. The Jewish people are very sensitive, we're very vulnerable to those who seek their destruction in exile, but God allows this innocent, sweet bird to escape time and time again from the trap. But in contrast to when a bird is usually, let's say a bird does escape from a trap, it's often injured in its escape, and the trap is probably not damaged very much. But here, in this pasuk, Hapach nishbar v'anachnu nimlatnu, we are spared and the trap is broken. So God, in His mercy, when He saves the Jewish people for the nations of the world, He doesn't just save them and let their captors go free. He saves them and breaks the trap. The Gentiles who laid the snare are the ones who end up shattered and broken, not the Jewish people in their escape. Although many times through history, you think of the Holocaust. So with the Holocaust, the Jews were the innocent, sweet little bird captured by the Germans and the Nazis, and God took them out of the trap, took them out of the death camps, out of with the SS and the Blitzkrieg and everything, and the Holocaust, and we're here. So, but who was shattered? At first, it definitely looked like the Jewish people were shattered, that we were nishbar, that we were totally shattered, and there was a shell, a remnant of the Jewish people, and they were at that time. But now you look, looking forward 80 years, and it's a different story. Hapach nishbar, that entire regime that was built up, they're gone. They've been relegated to the dustbin of history. They're the enemy. They're the nightmare that is fading away. And the Jewish people, we've rebuilt. We've rebuilt to levels that were never seen before, even before the Holocaust. So Hapach nishbar, the trap is broken, not the Jewish people. Maybe in the short term it was like that, but we've rebuilt. The Jewish people are saved. And finally, the chapter concludes, verse 8, our help is with the name of God, God who is the maker of the heaven and the earth. He rules every part of existence, every part of the heavens, every part of the earth. No matter where the Jewish people are, God is always close to them and able to liberate them. And this also, interestingly enough, ties really, I didn't see this until after I prepared this morning, so I didn't see it until after my drasha, but this really ties into what I was saying on Shabbos. So Hashem told Eliezer that he said, go and find a wife for Yitzchak, and He made him swear by Hashem Elokei Hashemayim v'Elokei Haaretz, God who is God of the heavens and God of the earth. And later, when he was referring to his past, Avram called God only the God of heaven. So our sages point out, because initially God was only recognized as God of the heavens. People on earth didn't recognize Him. Avram's life mission, we quoted from Rabbi Hauer, was exactly this, was to bring awareness of God to this world and create a love of God that he experienced and he shared with others, so that God will become Elokei Shamayim v'Elokei Haaretz, the God who is God of the heavens and God of the earth, meaning He was recognized on earth as well. And that really, we said, the way you do that, the way you make God recognized on earth, is you love God and you love Him so much that you share that love of God with others. And the way you share the love of God with others is you live a life that's infused and dedicated, and you become a person that just people see, this is what someone who loves God is like, Well, that's what I want to be like. I want to have that life. That's the biggest impact you can have. And here in this chapter, where we're saying that there's references to this idea of the nations of the world and the forces of evil try and wash us away, but we develop a love of God, and that's the only way that we can build a force that will withstand those evils that try and wash us away. So that love of God is exactly what makes God Oisei Shemayim V'Aretz, the one who's recognized. Of course, he always made the heavens and the earth, that's never changing, but he's the one who's recognized by humanity on earth as well, developing that love of God. So I thought it was cool, it all tied into the drasha.